There was drugs everywhere. John Dante was Hef's best friend, and Dante's little dog, Louie, who was a little tiny poodle, got hooked on cocaine.
The truth behind Hugh Hefner's wild lifestyle is darker than you might think. Sandra Theodore, who used to be Hef's girlfriend, came forward with her story after years of keeping the secrets to herself. The things she went through during her time at the mansion have traumatized her for the rest of her life. But what were the kinds of things that she experienced with Hef? And how does her relationship with her daughter tie into all of this? When it comes to Hef's girlfriends, we all know Kendra, Holly, and Bridget. Or even Crystal, Christina, and Carissa from the last season of The Girls Next Door might come to mind. But Hef had other girlfriends even before this, long before the Playboy Mansion was on reality TV. He'd been dating women much younger than him for years by that point. But in recent years, some of these women have spoken out about what the reality of living with Hef was like for them. And a lot of their stories are actually pretty dark and twisted. But maybe the worst one out of all of them is Sandra's story. Sandra lived with Hef in the mansion as his girlfriend between 1976 and 1981. That was almost 30 years before the times of The Girls Next Door, Kendra, Holly, and Bridget. Sandra turned 20 years old the same year she moved in with Hef and became his girlfriend. But even though it was a long time ago and Hef was a lot younger than he was when we saw him on the show, he was still 30 years older than Sandra. And the relationship she had with him wasn't exactly an equal partnership. That much is pretty obvious even just looking at the situation as a whole, with how much more money and social standing Hef had than her. But the things that happened to Sandra went much further than that. And for a long time, she kept it all to herself. For 40 years, she didn't speak publicly about her experience at all. That was until she was approached by producers who were making a documentary about Playboy, and she agreed for the first time to come out and share what really happened between her and Hef back in the day. And the things she said were really shocking and sad. Now, as the documentary mentioned, everything that Sandra, as well as everyone else in the documentary, said is allegations. Sandra never pursued legal action against Hef for any of the things that happened to her, so he was also never found guilty of any of the allegations. But according to Sandra, Hef was always extremely manipulative to her. She explained that at first, he wooed her and used his legendary charm on her. She was absolutely smitten by him and fell very deeply in love with him. But that's where things started to go sinister. While he was still charming her and reeling her in, Hef was perfectly nice to her and didn't show his dark side to her at all. In Sandra's own words, he knew all the right things to say to her. She said that he told her that he had never liked anyone as much as he liked her, and he even talked about starting a family with her and how much he wanted to have a baby with her. He promised her a happily ever after. But in hindsight, Sandra said she realized he had most likely never meant any of the promises he made to her. But she didn't know that at the time, of course. She was only 19 when they met, and she was too young and naive to know what was really happening. She believed all of it. And in the documentary, she explained that that was when he slowly started to change. Once she was fully in and had fallen for him completely, his true colors finally started to come out. And by that point, Sandra was too deep in to just turn around and leave. And she said that Hef became really controlling and started pressuring her to do all sorts of things she didn't want to do. For one, he allegedly pressured her to use illegal substances that she didn't want anything to do with. And she said he also made her take part in his wild adult parties. She didn't want to do that either, but somewhere along the way, it had become impossible to say no to Hef. She said that these parties took place even as often as 5 days a week, and it wasn't enough for her to just show up and be there. Hef allegedly made her do adult stuff with his friends, even though she really didn't want to. But it was only when things got even worse than that Sandra finally found the strength to leave. Because as time went on, she explained, Hef's activities got wilder and wilder. And eventually, he got into some really messed up taboo stuff that really was the breaking point for Sandra. She finally told him that she was leaving and moved out of the mansion. But the problem was that while she lived with Hef, she was cut off from the outside world. She wasn't really in contact with anyone besides Hef's social circles, so she actually ended up coming back to the mansion despite the terrible experience she had from there. Because even though she left, the friends that she made during her life with Hef didn't leave. And if she wanted to keep socializing with them, she had to come back to the mansion. And things were better then because she wasn't in a relationship with Hef anymore. She would even bring her kids along with her eventually. After she left the mansion, Sandra got married and had 2 kids, Taylor and Katie. The guy she married was actually one of Hef's friends. influence. She had met him while she still lived with Hef at the mansion. His name was Ray Manzella, and he was a manager for some of Hef's most successful talents. For example, Pamela Anderson. Obviously, he was pretty high in Hef's personal circles. Not even getting married helped Sandra get out of Hef's sphere of influence. But one thing that's good about this story is that Sandra's kids were more or less kept out of harm's way. And that's even though they spent quite a lot of time at the Playboy Mansion growing up. Unfortunately, though, this also led to a rift between Sandra and her daughter, Katie. Katie was actually on the second season of the documentary, Secrets of Playboy, together with Sandra. And the two of them went into how their mother-daughter relationship was influenced by her past with Hef. They explained that for a while, Katie was actually mad at Sandra over the way she talked about Hef. It was all because Katie's experience with him and with the mansion couldn't have been more different from Sandra's. For Katie, the mansion was this magical place. Being just a little kid in the middle of all that extravagance, she felt like she was in Wonderland. And the experiences she had there became some of her favorite childhood memories. Hef himself felt like a magical grandpa to her. She knew him as Uncle Hef, and she described how he would always just light up whenever he saw her. He was never anything other than lovely to her. And years later, she just couldn't understand why her mom was so insistent on viewing him in a negative light. She even got mad at her because she felt like Sandra was spoiling some of her favorite childhood memories. The two of them were on bad terms over it for a while, but that changed after Katie saw the documentary and heard everything that her mom had to say. She explained that that's when everything clicked for her, and suddenly it all made sense why Sandra still held so much against Hef even decades later. The two of them were actually able to reconcile thanks to the documentary, and apparently the relationship they have now is really good. Sandra said that now she can tell Katie anything. They've been through a rough patch, but they're all the stronger for it now, which is amazing to hear. But anyway, what do you guys think? Do you find Sandra's story shocking? And did you know that the Playboy Mansion was allegedly such a dark place? Let me know in the comments below.